Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Up next, we have a quick chat with some of the biggest and coolest wallet developers in the space. We've got who is behind the Sparrow Wallet, which is my personal favorite desktop wallet, which is really great and stuff. We've got Chow, who is a huge contributor to the wallet stuff in Bitcoin Core, as well as one of the main authors of the PSBT spec. So it's really great. We're really lucky to have him. And we have Jack Digenstein, who is on the Unchained Capital team doing wallet stuff, and is that correct?
Just Unchained now.
It's just Unchained now. Okay, just Unchained. They've become unchained from the capital word, and truly unchained. Really excited to hear what these guys have to say about what's going on in the wallets world, etc. My prompt for them is PSBT version 2 or anything else around wallets. So we'll see where the conversation goes. Great, thanks.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So we're here to first of all talk about PSBTs, and then we'll see where we go with other wallet stuff. I thought I would kick us off by actually just going into the history of PSBTs. So because we have Andy here, we can actually now PSBTs. The spec was published back in 2017, so we've got like some history going back. But what does the world look like before PSBTs, and what made you do it, and what's the kind of origin story there?
Yeah. PSBTs at that time, it's up. Maybe it's partially up. So PSBT, in 2017, there was no transaction form, a standard transaction format for a transaction that was not fully signed yet. And everyone was doing their own thing. So Bitcoin Core had their own thing using raw transactions and just generating data in kind of where it looked right, but it wasn't standardized. I know Casa was doing their own thing because they had multi-sig, so they needed their own format. Electrum had their own thing that was also generating data in where it looked right, except it wasn't actually right. And so everyone was doing their own format, and a lot of the times those formats didn't even contain all of the necessary data in order to sign the transaction. So at that time, I was working on hardware wallets, trying to get hardware wallets in the Bitcoin Core, and there was a similar need to have a transaction that contained, that could be not fully signed and also have all the data that is necessary in order to sign, except for guarantees. So this is useful for hardware wallets. It's also useful for being able to shuffle around transactions between wallets. So that's when I decided to come up with yet another format. But this time I wrote a bit, so it is standardized. That's where PSBTs came from. It was originally for hardware wallets to have all the data that a hardware wallet needed in order to sign a transaction. And this is also, it was then realized that this is useful for video.
Right, so that was 2017, and I don't think there was an immediate uptake on it, but now if we look at basically all wallets are using PSBTs. It's kind of the core of every wallet. I'm sure if you've never sent a Bitcoin transaction, you've interacted in some way or form, even if you didn't know it, with a PSBT. So it's kind of become one of the most important standards and formats, I think, in certainly in wallets. Now, here we are, 2023, and there's a new version which has been out for a while. It's called PSBTv2. The original was PSBTv0, so there is no kind of in-between version. There are two versions. And what was the motivation for creating V2 as the original?
Yeah, so with V0, there was there's a, so I was going to talk about the difference real quick. V0 has the unsigned transaction. It's It's just the inputs with no signatures and the outputs, and your transaction version, uptime, and all that. And that's just one thing, like that takes up one field in PSBTv2. In V2, the change was to break up all of that data. So instead of, here's the unsigned transaction and all the stuff as a writer onto it, as kind of what V0 was, V2 took all of those things and broke them up into the individual inputs. So you have, here's the inputs, previous the out point, and then here's also all the necessary data for that input, like the previous transaction and signatures and stuff. So the reason that I decided to do this, to break it up like that, is that you could construct a transaction collaboratively. V0 has a problem with, because it's just that one field with the entire transaction, it's really hard to add inputs and outputs in a safe way. V2 makes it a lot easier to add inputs and outputs, and also defines safe ways to do that. So you can add an input to a transaction even if it already has a signature under certain conditions. And so V2 defines a bunch of that stuff.
Is there a PSBTv2?
No. So it's a really stupid bit. Everyone kept calling V0 V1. So I decided to skip 1 and go straight to 2. Yeah, it's because originally there was no version number, and I was like, oh, maybe we will need version numbers at some point. And so if there's no version number field, then assume that the version is 0, otherwise use the version number, which we're just going to set to 2 for now.
So we basically have, just to recap what Andy just said, we have this original version where you have to, as a creator, you've got a number of different roles in the PSBT spec, and one of them is the creator. She creates the PSBT at the start, and then in the V0, you basically propose this transaction which has signatures in it, but it does have the kind of basics in it. It has like a version, and it has a lot time, and so forth. And then you can't change that after the fact, but we obviously have this desire to be able to create a PSBT where inputs and outputs can be added by roles that come later. So we have updaters who then come and add inputs and outputs. And if you have a transaction which is defined up front, then there are certain things that you can't change. Right? So it's really the ability to have these collaborative transactions that is really to PSBT v2. Now, Jack, I know that Unchained has recently worked with you, the guy behind it, working on BP2. What kind of use cases have led you to do that, and what kind of use cases do you see for PSBT?
So, Unchained provides Bitcoin native financial services, so we try to leverage what Bitcoin has as much as possible, and that's to remain interoperable with whatever a user might want to do outside of Unchained. We provide some services through our app, but we also provide a standalone app that they can go to sign their transactions. So in that we do a 2 of 3 multi-sig vault product, and many of the services are based off of that vault product. And remaining Bitcoin native, we use PSBTs to coordinate these signatures. And as you sort of brought up the roles there, Craig, so we create the PSBT. We're acting as the creator, the updater to add the inputs and outputs, and then pass it to the signers, the users, the clients, so that they can do what they need with their hardware device, or they can even perform these actions outside using our Caravan tool or Sparrow Wallet or any sort of external signer software that supports a PSBT. Earlier this year, though, Ledger was upgrading their Bitcoin app to require PSBTv2. And we were only supporting V1 because all hardware devices at the time were supporting V1. And we really had no need for any of the features that were added by V2. There's a lot of flexibility that's added in V2, like you can sort of compose the transaction as it moves through the different roles, adding different inputs and outputs. But we had no need for that. Ledger was upgrading, we had to jump, and so V2 in JavaScript or a TypeScript library so that we can support this over browsers. So the ledger sort of takes uses the browser to receive the transaction signing request. I should say they don't take the full PSBT, but they do take the pieces that it needs to sign through the browser.
Yeah, so I mean, what we have right now is sort of ledgers using it in that sense, in that kind of piecemeal sense, if you will. But I kind of wanted us to talk a little bit about what are the real use cases, right? Because we have this new, so I don't know which one you want to take this, but like, what are the use cases that you are interested in inside the cloud for PSBTv2? Why would we be moving to this standard model to drive to?
Well, the original reason was for people who wanted to construct a transaction collaboratively, so I think this could be useful for things like coin joins, where you have to specify your own inputs and outputs, and because PSBTs have this specific data format for inputs and outputs, you could reuse it there. Actually, one of the original reason I thought of this was because Rusty Russell came to me asking about if they could use PSBTs for goal funding, which was why I started working on B2. But I've since learned that they were considering PSBTs for goal funding. But it would have been cool to see it there.
That's great. Jeff?
More on that though. So I mentioned, like Unchained we want to remain interoperable with external software. And right now with the PSBTv2, the user can't expand their transaction out further from how we've sort of created it and the inputs and outputs that we've defined. If we lean more into the V2, then eventually users should be able to add different inputs that maybe aren't just the vault spend that they want to do. Maybe they're trying to combine 2 vault spends or something using external software. Yeah,
and I think one of the other use cases, and Jack recently wrote an article on the Unchained side, which really delves into the details of PSBT, so I would recommend checking that out. That's on the blog, right?
Yeah, Unchained, you can click resources and see the blog. I don't remember the exact path.
And one of the use cases mentioned in there was this concept of the Dutch auction. Jack, maybe you want to just talk a little bit about that. I thought it was quite an interesting one.
So I heard about the Dutch auction earlier to do with ordinal theory stuff, and it has to do with broadcasting a sort of template for a transaction that spends a specific UTXO. For ordinals, people want to have the chance of being part of a transaction that includes a specific UTXO because they think a particular Satoshi in that UTXO might be able to track their value. And so the Dutch auction is an actual auction format where the auctioneer continues to lower and lower the price until a buyer says they want to buy it. And you can do this through any sort of broadcast mechanism. Nostr would be a pretty good candidate, where you, as the seller, could broadcast a PSBT template that spends that UTXO and requires that certain other input be included because the outputs have that specific high price amount that you're looking for. And then after a certain time period, you broadcast a different version of the PSBT that includes a lower amount output, but the same input. And the first person to pick up the PSBT, add an input that fulfills the outputs, and broadcasts it on the network would win the auction, supposedly.
Yeah. So I think that's another kind of interesting aspect of it. And I think that it was, we can have opinions for and against this ordinal theory, but I think it was interesting how the ordinal crowd really took up the PSBTs and used them in this unique way that just hadn't really been used before, at least not on a broad scale. That was it's always interesting when people use the tech that we use in different ways. So, those are some of the benefits of PSBTv2, but obviously there are some technical challenges, and I thought, since we are devs, we should address those as we too have to face them. Technical question I have for you, Andy, is with V0, we had this idea of a global transaction which you could reduce to a TXID, which would give the PSBT an ID that didn't check a non-varying ID. But if you have the idea that you can add inputs and outputs, and you're then constructing the transaction out of that, do you not have a varying TXID and thus the PSBT is the varying ID? And how do you resolve that? How do you know, for example, if you have a bunch of them, let's say you've got a bunch of tabs open in Sparrow, open PSBTs, and now you open another one, and Sparrow has to decide which one are you trying to combine with, which of these should I choose? How do I solve that as a data?
Yeah, that was one of the big issues when I was coming up with the spec. I think it's fundamentally impossible to do when you're still trying to make the transaction. Just like when you're combining, you're adding inputs and outputs, you're changing what the transaction actually is. So I couldn't really. I think if it's still in like the construction phase and it doesn't have an ID, you just have to be aware of your sticking together. It's difficult, but at least when there are certain flags that are set in the PSBT that inform you whether you can add inputs and outputs, and if none of those are set, then actually everything is fixed. You can't add any more inputs or outputs because you might be invalidating signatures, for example. So when that happens, then you can actually do an ID by just remaking that global transaction out of the fields of the PSBT. It's a little bit more work, but you have to have that code anyways in order to make something that you can broadcast. So it's not too much more work, I think.
Yeah, so I think that it comes then down to sort of the UX. I guess you just have to ask the user like, what PSBT do you want to combine this with? So I think it's worth being aware of, because that was a nice feature, at least that I was able to rely on PSBT0, so I could just look at the open ones, and if there was one that opened, then TXID matched it, off you go. One of the other challenges, and I think somebody actually raised this on the mailing list when you were talking about BIP370, was the idea that, when you're trying to move from one standard to another, or trying to move from one version of the standard to another, you have this idea of what is compatibility between the two. Now, obviously, we have this incompatibility because V0 requires this kind of global TX, which is set at the start, and V2 requires it not to be there, so you can't, the two are completely incompatible by design. That's the way it was designed. But, how do we as wallet developers, this is kind of a question, how do we deal with that? Because we have, even if everyone wanted to move to PSBTv2, we've got devices which are only supporting V0, we've got wallets which are only supporting V0. How do we deal with that? What do you advise this?
So within HWI, it supports both V0 and V2, and then HWI talks about the hardware wallet, so Cold Card only supports V0, and Ledger supports only V2. So I've already run into this issue. And the way to deal with it is just that they are convertible between each other as long as you're not constructing this, as long as you're not still constructing it. So because you can extract all the fields to get that unsigned transaction from a V2, you can do the same thing, get that transaction, and implicitly convert it to a V0. Drop the fields, add that global one, have a copy that as V0. And you can do the same thing in the other direction. You can take a V0, turn it into a V2. And you can do that and hide it from the user, basically, that's happening, and still be compatible. It does actually, so I found when implementing this, it's actually, V2 is actually a lot easier to implement and understand, because all the fields for every input is already in the place that it's already next to other data inputs, so it's a lot easier to work with V2. And then just for serializing, you just figure out which version you want to serialize it as, and used for association.
So, if you think of it just at the creator rule, it's not too difficult to decide which type of PSBT to create and then create that format. The sort of micromanaging work comes when you later have to take a PSBT in a specific state and see if it's backwards compatible with V0. It's not using any of the new features, and then you try to convert it. And in a particular case, as we were trying to upgrade to support the ledger upgrade, we noticed that even though they were requiring a PSBTv2, they were requiring that the transaction type be V1, and that was actually and so I know that was relaxed in the BIP later, but we were trying to develop this and stick toward what the spec, how it was written. So there's actually a function in there that's called dangerously set transaction version 1, and then a comment that says do not use this, but we needed it just to get things to work in time. But it's these kind of messy things that make it difficult when various vendors aren't supporting this, a well understood standard.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, in Sparrow, what you ideally want is a wallet where you use a sort of a well understood standard like an output. Just want to be able to convert and just say, well, I'm just going to take the output script from this wallet, I'm going to create a new wallet with it, and everything's just going to work. That's what you ideally want. Unfortunately, because of these kind of migration issues, it's often quite difficult. What we would then have in the case of cold card versus ledger, right? Because cold card doesn't support V2 right now, I need to know that it's not in the case of HWI, but perhaps if I'm, the new cold card, QR or whatever, I need to know that it can only support V0 and send it V0, otherwise it's just going to have an error. Users will be like, why does this work? You can't, from looking at a PSBT, you can't tell what it is, you have to parse it, so you can't tell which version it is. So, there's this idea that you can't just get away with, a very basic description of the wallet. You actually got to know that this particular key, this expert belongs to this device, and this device supports certain things. And I mean, just to take a little aside, there's certain fields in the PSBT that some of the devices require. So because of a little-known exploit, the Trezor requires the non-witness UTXO field to be supplied even for safe transactions you're trying to send, because that was their solution to solve this kind of double signing attack that came out. So I think it was quite a sort of a heavyweight answer to that, but it is the answer that they chose. So now, if you send me a QR code and you have a whole lot of inputs, you have to now supply the entire previous transaction, and that just creates this massive QR code. So it's interesting that none of the QR hardware wallets want to do it this way. They're all like, we're just going to ignore the fact that this very unlikely attack actually exists, and they're just not going to do it. But Trezor won't even sign it without that. So again, I need to know as the coordinator that I'm talking to a Trezor, because otherwise I'm not going to want to supply that field. So you've got kind of nuances like that, which under the hood you have to take care of as the wallet. That's kind of an unfortunate reality that we have to deal with as well. Is that certain hardware wallets just accept certain things, and that's kind of the way they work. So that kind of leads me a little bit more into kind of broader wallet stuff, or WalletOps, if we can try and figure out what that means. So I mean, what kind of challenges have you, Jeff, you want to take to?
What you're bringing up is the concept of this resource that is the PSBT that's sort of separate or transcendent from just what's in the binary file. And maybe it follows specific rules, maybe it doesn't, but it's being passed between different systems or operators that may or may not agree in the same way as how their rule is supposed to operate, or what the spec should contain, or or how to do certain things. And that's what really creates the difficulties and confusions and the messes that have to be, or the hacks that have to be built, right? But it might be due to the fact that it's a new thing or newer thing, and it's not well defined just from convention yet. And over time, conventions probably will figure these things out, right? Sort of like how API specs are published, and people understand those pretty well because we have pretty good API models.
Yeah, with PSBTv2, we're just seeing, the things that happen when you build something and then realize it's slightly deficient. So you build something on top of it, and now you have to deal with backwards compatibility. So just like in Bitcoin Core, because it's descended from the original Satoshi client, we are constantly dealing with backwards compatibility issues in everything from database format to we added SegWit and Taproot, and PSBTs are completely new, and so but we still support the old way to do raw transactions, and it just becomes a huge mess once things people start using them, and then new features get added, and now you deal with backwards compatibility problems again.
So I mean, what kind of just moving to a more broader sense is kind of open this up away from PSBTs a little bit, trying to talk about more kind of wallet stuff. What kind of challenges do you guys experience in your daily lives in terms of, what are the challenges that users are having with wallets? The key kind of, given our paradigm of how wallets work, the concepts, where are users battling the most in your view? What kind of questions do you have to deal with a lot? Where's that pain point?
I think the pain point is when there are upgrades to the firmware that require us to make a change to support it. And I know eventually those have to happen, so it's just about keeping on top of them and making sure that that's the priority, right? To be able to support the thing that you claim you can support and make sure that it doesn't go down for an unexpected reason. And that's due to all the different devices operate differently. They all have their own method of receiving a form of PSBT or transaction. And I know an attempt at sort of merging everything together was HWI, but of course that doesn't solve the web problems so easily.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember that in JavaScript. For Bitcoin Core, one of our longest running, one of the most frequent things that we've gotten over the past 12 years has been people forgetting their passwords. It's amazing how many warnings you can put about, don't forget this, write it down maybe, use something you can remember, and people still fail to do that. And also backups. It's just I see many, basically issues or people asking questions on the Stack Exchange about, I forgot my password, how can I recover my money? And it always sucks to say, sorry, you can't. But there's also no way for us to, there is no way for us to protect your funds with encryption, but also letting you recover from forgotten passwords. And we still get lots of those, even though encryption's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely concur with that. One of my biggest issues I've had in recent times was the confusion people have with their wallet password and their BIP39 passphrase, which is just this, it's probably due to some extent the naming of those two things. People get confused because they have similar names. But the idea that you have a password, people are kind of accustomed, and this is not true in the Bitcoin Core case, of course, but they're kind of accustomed, well, I can remember this thing, but there's always a way for me to recover it. You know, I can always go back to some central, server and reset things, or that's obviously not the case with many wallets and their passwords. But it's certainly not the case with the passphrase, because the whole idea of the passphrase is that the wallet stores your BIP39 seed words, but you are meant to remember the passphrase. It's kind of the division of responsibilities there. So many users go into this thinking that a password is a passphrase. They enter some passphrase. They don't realize that even a single typo in your passphrase will create an entirely separate wallet with an entirely separate set of addresses. And that confusion has just been this pervasive one, to the extent that I've now put a UI into Sparrow that basically says use of a passphrase is an advanced feature. That you really you need to think twice. Like, don't just use this thing without seriously thinking about it. And also, I show the master fingerprint whenever you enter the passphrase to kind of indicate that you're changing your entire wallet every time you enter a character for your passphrase. So that's been one of my biggest pain points. Is actually a lot of UI just trying to make it clearer, but in a sense, actually just trying to direct users away if they're not aware of what this thing is, trying to put up warnings.
So these are sort of tech support issues. It's like something happened and it's broken, and maybe something could have been done to prevent it or fix it now. But I'm wondering, Craig, specifically in your case for developing Sparrow, how much pressure do you get from supporting new types of spends? Like, over time we've seen SegWit, supporting that, and then Taproot's the new thing. Like, how many people are busting down your door? Like, hey, when are you going to allow me to do a Taproot with Taproot?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the common questions is when Taproot multisig, and like we could implement Taproot multisig, but it would be of no benefit to the, it would be worse than the current multisig we have, because the crowd you're hiding in would be very, very small, and it would be very clear that you are hiding in a small crowd. So there's really no point, and that's why we're all kind of waiting for standards like Frost to arrive. But that's one of the key ones. So that question comes up a lot, and I can't answer it. Actually, probably needs an FAQ on the site, to be honest. But there is also like a small niche of users who kind of want to do the collaborative crowdfunding kind of use case, right? They want to create a transaction, which is obviously what PSBTv2 talks to. And the question I have to kind of answer is, do I change the UI of Sparrow for this use case in a way? How do I do it in a way that doesn't make the default use case that the 95 or more % of users, doesn't make it worse for them, doesn't make it more complex for them. And until my usual position on that is until I can figure out a way, I don't do it, because I think where I see Sparrow right now is sort of this kind of mainstream wallet, and you want to not be developing for niche use cases that make it harder to do the whole thing. So that's a tension that I often have to kind of deal with people ask this. So.
Even more in that direction, though, Unchained's, like, we try to limit as much as possible. We even put more like preventative gun controls around using our application and how a user can spend their coins. Sure, they could go outside to Sparrow or Caravan and spend them however they want, do some weird stuff, right? But even more so, we're trying to prevent the mistakes from happening. So, but they might still go to Sparrow, and so keep building in those preventative measures just in case they want to expand their horizons.
I think that we have it's very clear that there's like a sort of a layering of wallets, and you have the kind of ledger lives and the treasure suite kind of at the top where people kind of arrive first. And as they kind of delve down the rabbit hole, they might use something which is more advanced and kind of work their way through it. As a wallet developer, it's important to know what crowd you're trying to cater to in some of this. I don't know if you have any thoughts about you working on a bit of a core wallet. Like, who do you think your user is?
Well, we are constantly asking ourselves that too. Who are users? who are we catering? Because I actually had a couple, brainstorming issues of like, what are we even trying to do here with this wallet? And I guess the main thing is like we want to make a wallet that is mostly a jack of all trades. Your average user can use it mostly fine, but also if you're doing something, you can do some more power user things with multi-sigs and script and complex scripts. And it's nice to have a wallet that is packaged together with a full node. And so we're just trying to mostly make something that anyone can use, although there's a little bit more focused on being able to do cool things. So things like mini-script and descriptors that were added to core were mostly efforts to, part of it was an effort to modernize the wallet so that we could easily add new address types, but also so that people can experiment with mini-script and making complex scripts and have some tooling, easily available tooling for that.
So with our last few minutes here, I kind of wanted to move us to more positive themes and talk about like what kind of technology from the wallet point of view are you guys excited about that's coming down the pipe that you want to be building on in the sort of near to medium term future?
I've been doing a lot of work with Sign Payments, and I think it's really cool. And Bitcoin Core being a full node means that it's really easy for us to implement Sign Payments receiving. A little harder for everyone else because they're not running full nodes, but also I think having these static addresses is really useful. So we're trying to get that into core, and then along with that will be things that are needed for other wallets to be able to support Sign Payments as well, like exposing some of the data over maybe the BIP network, or and making them available along with compact block filters.
I'd like to expand out our PSBT usage a little bit more to sort of cement in that interoperability. And we're only using the PSBT in a very rudimentary way, but we don't expose it to the user enough. And so we've been talking about maybe allowing the user to maybe click a button or something to be able to see that PSBT at any moment, at any state during their process, in case they want to take it out of the application and do something breaking with it. But who knows?
Yeah, that sounds great. That's my kind of thing. I love delving into the details and understanding. That would be clear looking at the work I've done. From my point of view, the thing that kind of excites me for future Sparrow developments, and unfortunately I can't start working on it today because it's not finished yet, but Frost is really very interesting to me. If we look at multi-sig today, it's useful, but it does have certain issues. One of the issues is that if you lose one of your keys, you have to create an entirely new wallet to move your funds. Frost has a very nice feature in that you can revoke a key store and add a new one without having to do that. It also has this great feature that we can finally leverage the benefit of Taproot of creating a single key, so we don't have to reveal the structure of our multi-sig wallet when we spend, which we currently do. And if you have a multi-sig wallet, it just doesn't feel great to spend from it because you are revealing that you're using a 2 or 3 or what have you. So for me, that is a really nice UX improvement and certainly one that I'm looking forward to working on. But Frost is not done yet, so hopefully it will be done.
There's paper.
There is a paper.
You can just simplify the paper.
You can, but I'm not going to be the first one to release that. Cool. Well, that's all we have time for today. But thanks, guys.
One question, maybe? I don't have a question. Does anyone else?
Yeah, I noticed that there are a couple of BIPs that follow you, 371, 372. Any comments on those?
Can you give me the titles? I don't know.
Yes, it was yours, right? Tapping fields for PSBT.
Yeah, oh, right.
And then the second, another one is by RGB's Maxim Orlovsky's in contract tree fields for PSBT.
Yeah, so the design of PSBT is that people can design fields. There isn't really any rules of when, how, or why. So because PSBT was designed before Taproot, Taproot comes along and we need to have specific fields for smart signatures because those are different from ECDSA. With the paid contract fields, I haven't looked at that, and it's really just anyone can add a field, anyone can make a bit, as long as it's technically sound. So.
Anyone else?
Do you have an opinion on USIG2 versus Rust?
Yes, so I mean, using 2 is basically NNN, which is not usually what it's very useful for things like, if you want to create a lightning channel, which is a 2 of 2, but it's less useful in the case of, if you are a user who wants to create a 2 out of 3, then it's not really for you, right, in that case. So it's around just trying to choose the scheme that suits you best. Frost is a lot more complex than music 2, so it's got its downsides. It's not get away with that for free. But if you want a threshold-based multi-sig, which most people do want, so it's kind of almost an expectation of defaults, then you have to look at that. Great, okay. Thank you.